Welcome to my presentation called Between the Lines, Teaching Critical Visual Literacy in Year 5 using Multiliteracies Theory. Today's presentation explores the importance of visual and critical visual literacy in contemporary education. I will begin with Serafini's quote and its key ideas before defining visual literacy and critical visual literacy. Next, I will examine the theory of multiliteracies and its connection to the Australian curriculum. I will then explore using Sean Tan's picture book, The Lost Thing, as a cornerstone text, reflecting on the book after reading it with students, and then utilising the visible thinking routine, See, Think, Wonder by Harvard Project Zero. Serafini's quote highlights that children are surrounded by visual, written, and design elements every day, whether these are ads, websites, apps, posters, packaging, videos, or social media. Multimedia texts are not occasional, they are the dominant form of communication in their world. Meaning is not created by one element alone, but through how these elements work together. So what is visual literacy? Asher talks about visual literacy being the capacity to closely view, deeply understand, and meaningfully engage with, as well as critically respond to visual texts. Serafini says it's the ability to access, analyse, evaluate, and communicate information in a variety of forms. So if visual literacy is the ability to interpret and engage meaningfully with visual texts, critical visual literacy is about unpacking the broader context behind this text. Unsworth says that you want to move students from informal, tacit knowledge to transformative knowledge, and understanding that what appears to be a natural view of the world is actually a view produced by particular combinations of historical, social, and political influences. The New London Group from 1996 refer to the two kinds of multiplicity that represent how literacy needs to be. To successfully interpret texts, students must be able to not only read and write, they need to understand meaning across a variety of modes, navigate cultural and linguistic diversity, engage critically with the social and cultural contexts in which the text is produced, and translate these meanings across the different modes. So Cope and Kalantzis talk about 4 knowledge processes which describe how learners move from experiencing, so they're being immersed in new and familiar texts, to conceptualizing, where they're learning meta-language and conceptual tools needed to describe and understand what they've experienced, and then move to analysing, so they're examining the patterns and structures within the texts and critically evaluating this meaning. And then the last stage is applying, so students are designing or creating their own interpretations of multimodal texts. So these 4 processes form the backbone of multiliteracies pedagogy. So by Year 5, ACARA expects students to read, view, and interpret multimodal texts. So multimodal literacy, you can see here, is not optional, it's embedded in the core curriculum. I've included 3 different examples of content descriptors that I've found that relate to multimodal texts for Year 5 English. And so this shows that students are really needing to interpret, analyse, and create texts where image, language, and design work together to create meaning. So through the picture book, The Lost Thing by Sean Tan, I will explore how multimodal and critical literacy can be taught in upper primary. The Lost Thing tells the story of a boy who discovers a bizarre lost creature at the beach and sets out to find somewhere it can belong. Sean Tan emphasises that he writes picture books, not children's books. His books, like many, deal with complex themes. Tan's illustrations do not explain text, but they build a landscape of questions and ideas. Meaning is not only constructed through the words. Meaning is made through colour, symbolism, composition, cartoon-style storyboard images, typography, visual metaphor, and intertextual references, such as stamps and engineering diagrams. So this is a really good example of synesthetic meaning making, where meaning flows across different modes. So One learning activity I thought would be useful for introducing this text to students. So before even reading the story, I would ask the students to look closely at the cover. Can you guess what the story is about? What hints do you see in the illustrations? And if I had taught a unit on multimodal texts and metalanguage, I'd be looking for that to be reflected in the students' responses to that question. And after reading the book, I'd do a think, pair, share. So breaking the class into pairs, I'd ask the pairs to think about their response to the story and share their ideas, and then come together as a whole class to share these ideas and discuss further. Another useful thinking routine or classroom activity that can be used to encourage students to make careful observations of images and texts is the See, Think, Wonder routine designed by Rich Hart and Perkins from the Harvard Project Zero. So the key principles behind this are fostering certain learning dispositions and that learning is a consequence of thinking. And fostering thinking requires making this thinking visible. And the development of thinking is inherently a social endeavour. So this routine helps stimulate curiosity and sets the stage for inquiry. It can be easily applied to different multimodal texts. When applied to visual texts such as Sean Tan's The Lost Thing, it promotes deeper analysis, critical thinking, and meaning making by helping students engage with both the explicit and implicit messages within images. So first, I'd ask the students to see. So what do you notice? Observe the colours, characters, settings, symbols, and visual details of the piece. Then you'd move to think. So based on the evidence that you've seen, interpret the meaning from this and make some inferences. And then move to wonder. So what questions do you have about this piece? So this is to generate curiosity, explore different perspectives, and deepen their understanding. So I'll now give an example of myself undertaking the See, Think, Wonder routine based on this beach scene in The Lost Thing. So see, so what do I see in this image? I see lots of sepia and grey and monotone colours contrasted with the vibrancy of the red, strange lost thing creature in the middle of the beach. I see storyboard images being used by Tan. I can also see engineering texts as the background to the scene. The landscape is pretty surreal. It's a bit of a dystopian scene. And the perspective of me as the viewer, I'm looking down on the beach from a distance, from above. I'm looking at a very crowded scene where the beach has sort of been overtaken by industrial urban landscapes. So moving to think. The lost thing, I believe, is something that doesn't seem to belong here. So everybody on the beach is walking the same way and doing the same thing. The umbrellas are all facing the same way, and the beach, which should be a beautiful, natural, unspoiled thing, has been overtaken by overbearing industrialization and what seems like conformity. So moving to wonder, why does no one notice the lost thing? What message is Tan sending about belonging, difference, conformity, and societal indifference? Is Tan encouraging us to be more observant or empathetic or open-minded through this story? And what is the image suggesting about the type of world that the lost thing lives in? So this presentation has highlighted how visual literacy and critical visual literacy equips Year 5 students to interpret, analyse and question multimodal texts in meaningful, empowered ways. So I have explored the concepts of visual literacy and critical visual literacy, the theory of multiliteracies, curriculum links to Akara English, Year 5, and then I've used the cornerstone text, The Lost Thing by Sean Tan, as my example of a interesting and engaging classroom strategy using a particular text to focus on, which is a multimodal text in itself. I've used a book reflection activity, and then I've moved into exploring the See, Think, Wonder routine by Project Zero. And then the last slide just shows the references that have informed my work. So thank you for listening. Bye-bye.